Hello, how you doing? My name is Ken Kinter. I'm an assistant professor at Rutgers University. The purpose of this presentation is to talk about psychiatric inpatient treatment malls. This is the second in a series of videos, and this one deals specifically with Fidelity issues and something called the Inpatient Treatment Mall Scale. If you haven't seen the first version, which is Intro to the Treatment Malls, I would recommend that you start there, unless you have a good background in what these things are already, because this is specifically about fidelity and measurement. As always, if you like what you're hearing, go tell somebody. We appreciate your comments and your feedback and your viewership. And if there's any subject in this area that you would like us to take on, we'd be happy to do it. So the project that I work for is the Institute for Inpatient Psychiatric Rehabilitation in a project called the State Hospital Psychiatric Rehabilitation Initiative. Basically, our goal is to improve the quality of care and working conditions in New Jersey state psychiatric hospitals. And we do that by infusing psych rehab goals, values, and principles and current research. None of this is possible without the financial and other types of contributions from the New Jersey Department of Health. They make what we do possible, and credit where credit is due. So, what we're here to talk about today, if you already know a bit about psychiatric treatment malls and you're thinking more in terms of the measurement aspect of it, specifically things like fidelity, this is what we're here to talk about. So, we'll start by going over some of the basics, the stuff that's in video number one, just as a refresher. And then we'll talk about mall fidelity and fidelity measures, and specifically how to run the inpatient mall treatment scale, or ITMS. And we'll talk about some of the results that we've had when we've run this in New Jersey state's psychiatric hospitals. They're a little dated. We did them before COVID, but we're going to be getting them off the ground and doing new versions. So that might be a future video. So as mentioned before, an inpatient treatment mall involves providing programming through recovery-oriented psych rehab principles in a centralized location with increased elements of consumer empowerment. Okay, so that's a lot of words. Really what it means is it means that someone is attending programming not on the unit where they reside in a psychiatric hospital. They have somewhere to go. They have choice over what their schedule and what their program looks like. And they have some input into what programming is available for everybody. So as much consumer choice as possible. The goal is to help people learn the skills that they need to not only function in the hospital, but to be able to be discharged from the hospital and maintain tenancy in the community. And I cannot stress strongly enough, if someone thinks that an inpatient mall is just a centralized programming unit, they've really sold it very, very, very short. There's supposed to be a lot of recreational and social opportunities there. So it's really just not where the programming happens. There's a lot more going on than that, as discussed in the previous video. The reason it was brought up is because people were in these hospitals for very long periods of time and they weren't getting better. And they weren't getting better because they didn't have choice. They didn't have a wide range of programming. They didn't learn what they needed to learn to be able to stay out. They spent a lot of time sitting in day rooms, bored, watching TV with the same people day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out. And the programming was not designed for their specific individual needs. And the mall is designed to address and fix all of these things. So we mentioned the outcomes we were looking at before. Many of the goals that a hospital seeks is met by implementing an inpatient treatment mall. So, of course, we're a huge advocate for that. So where we get into in this video is looking at what makes a mall. So one of the hard part about fidelity measures is you don't know what they are when you start out. You kind of need to figure it out. So what are the elements of a treatment mall that make it work? Where do you get the benefit from? So here you see a list of some of the earlier treatment malls and some of the earlier publications that was done. And what are the components that actually make that mall work? Choice, social components, something called economy of scale, which is how efficiently you use staff. Treatment planning, the connection of the mall to treatment planning, the elements of leadership. Peer involvement is a big one. And of course, there's a whole list of them. So you take all these things, and these are all ingredients that go into the mall. We don't know which ones are the most important therapeutic ingredients, but you try to get as many of them in there as possible. And as you can see, different malls have identified different elements. So our goal with the inpatient treatment mall scale is to find out what these essential ingredients are, as well as get feedback about how staff and consumers like the mall, what they see are the strengths and areas where it still needs to be developed. So how this is done is by surveys. So that we surveyed the consumers and the staff, and the surveys had subscales to catch some of these qualifications that you were just looking at. Where are these ingredients? Where are these elements that make the mall what it is? Standard Likert scale, combination of doing this online and in person so that we could catch the maximum number of staff and consumers. And then we put this together in a report, which we reviewed and shared with the hospital so that the hospital could then make decisions about what changes they wanted to make to improve the treatment mall. So here are the subscales. We're looking for consumer and staff empowerment, by the way. Let's not leave the staff out of this. The therapeutic environment, very important. The economy of scale, as we mentioned before, how you're using your staff, because everyone is very concerned with using staff and resources the best possible way. Money's tight, of course. Management and oversight. How is the mall managed? How is it run? The programming itself, both the quality, quantity, and evidence-based to it, and attitudes toward programming. What do people actually think about the mall? Do they like the mall? So here's how these domains shake out in the ITMS. And there's a certain number of questions geared toward each one. So in this middle column, here are the 18 consumer survey questions and which of these aspects they address. And then the same with the staff survey. So we have more questions for the staff survey, because again, we're talking about clients that are in a state psychiatric hospital. They may be at their most symptomatic. So we try not to badger people with too many questions, but at the same time, we want to get as much information about this as possible. So when we did it the first time, we used SurveyMonkey. We got 92 responses from 7 different disciplines in the hospital. And again, it's a standard Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And it also included if a person just didn't know. You can have a mall open for a couple of years and there still may be a lack of knowledge about what it is that it does. On the consumer scale, we had the 18 questions in the 6 subscale, same format as we tried to make them as parallel as possible. So here were some of the areas that we got some traction on, that people learn skills that help them with their goals, their programming help them with personal goals, and that they choose their programs. And when we administered the scale, we really wanted to capture not only the clients who attended the malls, but those who didn't. We wanted to see what the difference between those two were. So we were able to sample, in the malls, we were able to sample a certain subgroup of clients. And then we were also able to get them on the units as well for the people that weren't attending, because we really wanted to find out what makes the difference between those two and how we can entice the people that aren't attending to attend. Staff, we reached through their interdisciplinary meetings and encouraged to get as many people as we could involved so we could get more feedback about how the malls were doing. So these were the different steps. One was to administer the surveys. Following that, we put a report together and we wanted to compare what the staff responses were versus the consumer's response, and also compare between disciplines. Did certain disciplines like or dislike the mall more or less? And then when it's done, we review the report with the hospital and talk to them about, okay, here's the level of fidelity that the mall has or that the different malls have in the hospital, and what are steps we can do to improve that. And sometimes it's a matter of getting the best bang for your buck. Is there a small change we can make that would have a dramatic increase in fidelity? Resources are, of course, always an issue. Now, where the clinical formulary comes into play is that becomes a vehicle where we use evidence-based practices to be the bulk of the groups that are being offered, so that we can say that the groups that we're offering have a research basis to them, and that should be one of the therapeutic values of the treatment. Another step that can be taken is a consumer survey. One hospital we're working with is in the process of doing that now. What is it that the clients want? And let's balance what we feel that they'll benefit from therapeutically, but then also what they will enjoy, so that you can mix those two things together. So at Trenton Psychiatric Hospital, we got a response rate of about 34%. And there were a couple questions that were able to predict whether someone attended the mall or not. And the tool was able to detect what areas of the mall were doing mall-based programming and which were not, which you can actually see here. You can see on the scale because they were in the process of transitioning. So some had mall or not. So the first part of the ITMS was, can it tell what a mall is? So here's an example of some of the scores that we got back. You can see those six subscales. So we have the patient's scores and the staff scores and the difference. And it was interesting that the um, patients almost universally had a higher opinion of the mall than the staff did. And again, this is on a Likert scale. So most of these scores are between 3 and 4. So it's somewhere between the center point and what you would consider good. And then you have the staff scores in there as well. So we were able to ask the staff and the consumer similar questions to get their impressions. And this is how they sort of graphed out. At Ancora, we also did the ITMS, administered it to 189 consumers and 87 staff. And some of the results that we got back from that is, again, staff had more negative views on the subscales compared to consumers. What the consumers really liked was getting off the units and availability of other activities than groups. Again, not just a centralized programming unit, having social, recreational, other sorts of activities, vocational, educational. So not just one of the things that made the mall work for the consumers was that it was not just a centralized programming. I enjoy going to the programming area. Programming includes groups and activities that focus on learning skills. I feel safe attending programming. These are significant things. Areas of concern, and this was part of the nice part, is we got feedback. We got work to do from this report. Lack of programming provided by peers. The absence of a catalog to inform consumers and staff of what choices were available. And the consumer's statement that groups were often canceled or combined. So we had data to back that up. And to the hospital's credit, they immediately set out to developing catalogs for each mall to increase the awareness of what people's options were. Some of the other results we got, the staff results from Ancora, the fact that there was not much consumer peer-run programming, a very low score. Participation of community agencies, also low score. And the amount of choice that consumers had. Staff choosing groups for consumers rather than consumers choosing them themselves. So these low scores were areas where we said, okay, we can intervene here and pick these scores up. Higher scores, groups that focus on developing skills such as social and coping skills, good option for patients, and compared to staying on the unit, going to the programming area is good for patients. So these were the higher scores. So because of this feedback, we immediately went to work. The catalogs were developed. There was a greater connection between the rehab department and treatment teams, getting each treatment team a rehab person, because that rehab person would be most aware of what the groups actually were. We immediately got to work on having more groups run by consumers, more involvement from the community side, changing up groups so that we had more interdisciplinary participation. We developed alternate sites if there were people that really couldn't handle all of the stimulation that was going on in the mall. We made smaller areas that were quieter to try to engage people that may have been in crisis or just came to the hospital. We developed post-tests so that people could test out of certain groups so they just wouldn't be in a group forever. If they placed out of it, they could then move into something else. And of course, we were always looking for new resources to bring to the malls, recreational, social, something called the wellness library. We always wanted to bring new things to the mall to make them more interesting to the clients. So, and as we stand right now, we're actually just getting ready post-COVID to run these again because the malls were impacted by COVID and returned to unit-based programming. So we're just in the process of reopening and rebuilding, and we figured this would be a good time to evaluate and see where we can put our energy to get the most improvement. So there will be some more data about this coming up in the not too distant future. But the standard piece of this is that inpatient psychiatric treatment malls improve the quality of treatment in psychiatric hospitals. The scale is an example of how you can measure and improve the fidelity of an intervention, even a big complex intervention like a treatment mall. It's an iterative process. The ITMS is not perfect. We've already had 5 versions of it. We're going to have more because as the data comes back, it tells us which elements correlate most highly. So we'll be modifying this as we go. How the ITMS is done is a survey with parallel versions for consumers and staff. It can be done online or written form, wherever you're at technologically. We use this data to guide the fidelity and improvements of the treatment mall and the facility itself. And if you have any questions about the ITMS, if you want to see it, or if you would like information about how to use it, you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you out with that. And this is some of the research where all of this material came from. Also, a really good reading list if you want to know more about treatment malls. The article at the bottom, the Bartholomew article, is unpublished as yet, but you can get that from us if you want it. It's really good. I'm hoping it will be published soon. And again, thank you for your time. And you know how to get us. You got our email and our video. Our link is at the bottom, so you can find other videos if you'd like. So again, thank you for your time.